What's up, everyone, and welcome to Level 7. It is time for another episode of the Agents of Fandom podcast. I'm your host, TJ Zwarich, joined, as always, by my co-host and good buddy, Adam Blevins. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing good. I almost don't feel worthy of that jovial introduction that you just gave me because as we were just remarking off air, so tired. It's been a long day, a long week, but a good week. I feel better this week than I did last week. I talked about it a little bit in my intro last week, how I was a bit busy, a bit overwhelmed, but I'm getting back. I'm getting into the swing of things this week. So even though I am even busier now than I was last week, this time I feel better mentally, physically. I feel like I'm better equipped even than I was a week ago to handle everything. So while I am tired, I feel great. I'm excited to talk about the Bad Batch and X-Men, 2 episodes of the show that I really, really loved.
This feels like a great time to shout out my friend and former co-host of the Ticket to Reality podcast, Lee Swift. He was finalist, of course, of season 2 of The Circle on Netflix. Whenever we would record Ticket to Reality, myself and so often Emma, our other co-host, our fellow agent, we'd just be so tired of a long day's work, not want to do it. But as soon as we'd get there, this power of friendship and good content would just wake us up and get us ready to go for another episode. No matter how tired I seem to be, as soon as we actually get recording, it does perk me right back up. As Adam said, we got a fun episode of Star Wars The Bad Batch, and then we got a wonderful episode of X-Men 97 as well, where we're going to be bringing in a great special guest to talk about X-Men 97 as well. Make sure you follow the Agents of Fandom on socials, at Agents Fandom on TikTok and Twitter, Agents of Fandom everywhere else. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure you follow the Agents of Fandom wherever you get your podcasts. I know I say, just hit that like button like it's just a thing that we're supposed to say because we're podcasters. But seriously, it actually makes such a wild difference on YouTube for us if you smash that like button. So please, if you're giving us a listen, go down there, give it a little click. Let's start things out talking about the Bad Batch, Adam. We are getting towards the end of this season, and I really don't feel like there's all too much really to talk about with the Bad Batch this week. It was a pretty quiet episode in terms of what we can theorize on, what we can speculate on for the future, what we can analyze. But it was a really fun race against the clock style episode that really, I think, portrayed and showed off Omega's growth over the 3 seasons of the Bad Batch.
Yeah, it is. It's very much like a transition episode in that we've been wondering what was going to happen. How are they going to, this whole second half of the season, it's how are they going to get back to Tantus? They have no leads, they have nothing. And then we realized, I think 2 episodes ago, that Omega's going to have to turn herself in. That's the only way. So then it was wait, now how are they going to find her, and how is Omega? And then it's I feel like when we look back on the season in a couple weeks when it's over, because I believe we only have 2 episodes left, we'll look at this episode as what connected pretty much the whole, not even just the 3rd season, but the entire show to these last couple of episodes. Is everything is come down to this, because now they're headed to Tantus and there's no turning back. They don't have an escape route. This is, I'm sure they'll figure out a way, but this, at this point, to them, it might as well be a one-way trip, but they don't care because they're going after Omega. And I know we're going to talk about Omega a little bit, because I agree with you 100% too, that this was not, there's not a lot to dissect here because, like I said, I do think this is a kind of a transitionary episode, but there's a lot of good stuff with Omega here. And it's almost pretty clearly preceding something else, something bigger that's going to happen. But there's some really, really good stuff with Omega, just in terms of parallels with her from how she's grown into a leader and a better person, like you said, that I can't wait to talk about. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. There's not a ton. This is a great episode, but there's not a ton to dissect here because it's not telling its own story as much as I think it's setting up, it's kind of closing the book on what we've seen and also setting up a couple of really big things to come.
I have almost the polar opposite thought about this week's episode of The Bad Batch as I do this week's episode of X-Men 97. And with this episode of Bad Batch, I kind of feel like this episode and last week should have been one episode. We talked about last week where it's it was fine. It just didn't really fit the rest of the season. We're going down towards the climax here, and it kind of slowed it down and broke the momentum. This episode was still in that transition phase, building to that big epic finale. but had a lot more intensity, had a lot more excitement and emotion. I'd say not even like excitement in terms of action, but in terms of emotion. And I kind of feel like these last two episodes should have been one because we didn't really get further in the story this week. But it kind of had the crucial emotional beats that I felt like last week was missing, where last week focused on Rampart extra. Today, this week's episode just kind of used Rampart as a tool in the episode for storytelling, and it was a very interesting one, I found. But kind of before we even get to that, your guy Echo was back, and he carries a mission through with the team, with the Bad Batch, to go back and get Omega, and it's always great whenever they're teaming up with Echo or Rex.
I mean, was there ever any doubt that Echo was going to get the job? I say that as somebody who, even rewatching today, my heart was beating a little fast watching it. Like I knew what was going to happen, and they still do a really good job, kind of making me question, like, oh, is he going to get it done? Because they always face, and this is not even specific to the Bad Batch. This is kind of a Star Wars thing in general, and I mean, just a common trope. There's so many obstacles for them to climb over, and they're constantly facing so many setbacks that sometimes I'm like, is this going to be the one that finally gets them? But no, they always come through. But that's actually a great point too, what you said. And I 100% agree that I think if we combine these two episodes, because it does, like, I'm thinking now about where we left off last week. It does feel like this was almost two episodes that they kind of split right down the middle. But that's the hard thing about some of these Star Wars animated shows like this, where these episodes are only 20 minutes long. Because even this episode, I think it was 25 minutes, but the credits roll with like 4 minutes left. And you've got probably about a minute of title card stuff. So this is roughly a 20-minute episode of television, which is not a lot of time to get into things. And that can be a problem when we get down to the end of these seasons and we want all of the stuff that we're watching to feel important and to matter. There's just going to be times, I feel like, by nature, that 20 minutes at the time, like, not every single scene that we see is going to be important. And when you're cutting this down into 20 minutes, it's like even like if you think about like HBO shows and things that are pretty much consistently, all of them, like an hour long. If you took those and divided them into 20-minute segments, even like within episodes like 8, 9 to 10 of something like The Last of Us, or I believe that only had 9 episodes. So let's say 7, 8, and 9. I'm sure you could find a 20-minute stretch in those shows that wouldn't make a great episode of TV, that we'd be sitting here saying the same thing. Like, yeah, this just felt like it was missing something. Felt like it kind of needed to be attached to something else to work. But like I said, that's just the nature of these Star Wars animated shows. But I still feel good about where we're going. It's like you said. I don't think this was a bad episode. I just don't think it works as well on its own as so many other episodes have.
And one of the parts that I think was the best for me was just, I mentioned earlier, we get to see how far Omega has come over 3 seasons of the Bad Batch. Early on, she gets rescued, and she's never been overly introverted. She's never been socially unaware. We still get, like, the very first episode, she sits down at the lunch table with the Bad Batch, and she's like, "Hey guys, you don't really fit in either. I like you. I want to sit with you." And so when we see her sitting down with all of these other children in captivity, explaining the layout of the lab and how they're going to escape, being a leader, inspiring them, it's exciting because she has come such a long way, and it's very, early Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa-esque, that it's inspiring. They're inspiring people to revolt against the power that's imprisoning them. And so it's awesome seeing how far Omega's come, and she looks like a hero.
Yeah, she really, I was so taken aback, especially rewatching this today, like watching her kind of navigate the situation with all these kids, because I kept thinking about what would we get if this had happened back in season, like if season 1 Omega had, been captured and brought to this same place. How would she be reacting and interacting with these kids? She would fit in perfectly well with them, and that she would be just like them. She'd be scared. She'd have no idea what to do. But now it's almost, she is like, to these kids, she's like what the Bad Batch were to her in season 1. Like they helped her just like she's going to help these kids now. And she doesn't, but except the thing about Omega is she doesn't need 4 or 5 people. I mean, she's going to use these kids, like, not use these kids. That's the wrong way to word it. But like, these kids are going to help her in her escape plan. And I'm sure she's got all this figured out and what she's going to need and want from them. But she can do all this on her own. I love when she speaks with so much confidence, and like this whole time, she's never like, honestly, I don't know. She's just like, I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. I've escaped from this place once and I'm going to do it again. And this time I'm taking you with me. I was like, felt like Andy Samberg after he watched the lineup scene. He's like, oh, chills, just chills. I was like, there's no doubt in her mind.
That's the one. That's the guy who murdered my husband. Oh wow, I forgot why we're here.
I completely forgot about that. What a treasure of a show. But yeah, it's great because it's great watching her speak with that confidence, because that's what great leaders do. They inspire people to believe that, because for them, like realistically, this isn't 100% guarantee that they're going to escape and everything's going to be fine. But they can't know that. They have to believe that this can be okay. And Omega knows that. But she can't, like, she knows that there's a chance that one of these kids might die. Something might happen. And that might be a thing that happens in these last 2 episodes, even for me, as I'm thinking, like, I don't know how confident I am that all of these kids are going to escape, whether one of them gets left behind. I would be a little surprised if they like kill one of them, just because this has been a pretty mature season of TV so far, like season 3 of the Bad Batch. But I'd be surprised if they killed one of these kids, because I really like all these kids. But that would be a way to kind of get me, especially Eva. I would die for anytime she speaks. My heart, I want to explode, because she's just so sweet. I don't know. Apologies. I don't know who does the voice acting for her, but whoever they are, they're doing a phenomenal job. And there's just to circle back with like everything with Omega, it's amazing to see. I know we're talking in circles because we've said this so many times, but it really is. You can't say it enough how great of a leader she's come to be over the course of the show. And it's on full display in these final few episodes, because these kids need her.
The thing I think that made this episode so much better than the last one, even though they were very similar style, transition, how are we going to get to the point of the epic finale? And you summed it up wonderfully in your recap up on agentsoffandom.com as well. We get Echo back, we get Omega inspiring the youth and being a leader, and it finally sets us up to where we need to go. As someone who has seen the screeners, you're up to date now. You haven't seen anything else. The final 2 episodes of the Bad Batch are going to be.
No, I've seen the next episode. I've seen the next.
Oh, is the final one a 2-parter then? The final one is a 40-minute one then.
Okay, I don't know about that, because they didn't give us there was a rumor flying around today that the last episode is like over an hour, which I kind of think it has to be, just in general. Like, I'm not saying this based on what we've seen next episode, because I'm not going to talk about that at all. I don't want to get in trouble, but it just seems like it would be really hard to do a 20-minute finale, even like with the whole season have been like, or with all the episodes being 20 minutes. I don't remember how long the season 1 and 2 finales were, but for this being a series finale, this may be the last time that we ever see the Bad Batch in these next 2 weeks. Like, this may be it for them. They can't be a 20-minute episode of TV. But yes, I have seen next week, but I have no idea if we're getting like a 2. I know 15 is the end. There's only 1 episode, but I don't know how long it's going to be. I have no idea.
Well, there you go. See, and I thought there was 2 that press wasn't seeing, and so maybe that was like the 2-part finale there, and that's why I thought it was at next week. But I guess there is still one next week, and so we won't go into full speculation mode. Obviously, we're not going to cover this show fully deep in depth, but before we transition from the Bad Batch to X-Men 97, there is something I wanted to touch on really quick, because there's a show that just released on Amazon Prime that I know is near and dear to your heart. You're a big fan of the game franchise and you love the show as well. You wrote the review up on agentsoffandom.com. Why don't you talk to me about why you love the series Fallout so much, and what you thought of the series?
Oh wow, I was not expecting a platform to talk about Fallout. What a delight. What an amazing surprise this is. Okay, so the great thing about the show is what I think is so difficult for a lot of video game adaptations and really adaptations in general. This Avatar: The Last Airbender struggled with this a lot. Not in that I think it's bad, but that people are watching like recently this live action adaptation, people are watching season 1 and you're comparing everything beat for beat with how does this go with the animated. And I know that's not a good habit to be in, but just by the nature of what you're like, it's impossible not to do that. Like to not at least, especially when your source material is so good. And Fallout made this perfect choice that they didn't adapt one of the games. This isn't recreating the events of one of the games. This is like it's set in the same timeline, but it's 9 years. Like the most recent game in Fallout takes place in 2287, I believe. 2287. I also got a timeline piece on Agents of Fandom about this as well for those that are interested. But at 2286 is when Fallout 4 takes place, or 87, excuse me. And then Fallout, let's see, scroll down right here. I believe we can see it. So if I'm not mistaken, 2287. And then the show is 2296. So it's 9 years after. But the only thing that they're really adapting, excuse me, which is what makes this show great, is that they're adapting the world in which it exists. But these are all new characters. This is a new story. Which still, like, there's not a lot of room to wiggle there too if you just screw up the story and it sucks and you have shitty characters and shitty writing. Like, it could have been bad, but they knocked that out of the park. And also you're just not watching this like, wait a minute, well, in the game they did this and I kind of like that better. You're just enjoying what's laid out in front of you, which is pretty rare for adaptations. And they did there's one thing, if you haven't played the games, that's special about Fallout is there's these different factions, and in the show we pretty much only get the Brotherhood of Steel, and I believe there's maybe one more I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's so, like, in the game we've got the Minutemen, we've got the Institute, we've got so many other factions of people, like the Railroad, and everybody is so different. And even in the show, when they're only scratching the surface of that, they do such a great job differentiating, because these factions are very, very different. They all have different principles. And some of them are like the Brotherhood of Steel is basically like a military dictatorship. They're searching for all the old world technology so they're in their head, like, they tell everybody, well, we just don't want anybody else to use it, but they're really using it for like bad purposes. Like the Brotherhood of Steel is not great, even though they're like classic bad guy. They think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. And then you've got people like the Railroad, who from the game, for example, are like, well, I don't want to go into that because that could be potentially spoiling things in the second season. I'm going it's hard to talk so much about why I love this without potentially, and because I don't want to, similar to The Last of Us, right? I'm not going to talk about going into The Last of Us season 2, like based on what happens in the game, what I think is going to happen. Because if somebody's wanting to experience all this fresh, I want them to be able to experience that fresh. But they've only scratched the surface. I'll say this too. They've only scratched the surface. They have probably, between factions and different characters and different regions and games, they've adapted like 5 to 10% of their like collective pool of source material. They have so many more things. It really does. The director, apologies, I can't remember who he was speaking with, said like 3 or 4 weeks before the show that they've probably done they're just scratching the surface with everything that they've done. And that's, after watching this, I was so skeptical because, video game adaptations are really hit or miss in general. But they knocked this out of the park. And I know I haven't given people a ton of reasons, I feel like, in this long monologue, like why exactly you should be watching it. But the characters are really, like, just to sum everything up, the character, even if you haven't seen, it's really accessible too. Like, if you haven't seen or played any of the games, there's nothing you need to know going in. Anybody can jump right in and enjoy the series, whether they've played all the games or none of the games. The characters are great. The story is great. The world is great. The visual effects, the world, like the design, everything. There's like no big complaints that I could think of with the show. The only thing that I have negative to say about it is that it was a binge drop, which is so frustrating to me because The Boys is coming out in June. This show could have let up like 2 weeks before The Boys. Prime could have dominated the conversation for the better part of 5 months if they just weekly released Prime could have had all of the conversation. And then they decided to release this show all episodes at once. And now the conversation is pretty much over. Part of the reason I was so taken aback when you asked me about this is because nobody's even talking about it anymore because it's out of the cycle. The finale aired more than a week ago. So, there's not a lot of conversation going on, which is so frustrating because this show deserves it. But if you're not watching, and season 2 just did get announced right before I think 30 minutes or so before we went live, which is absolutely incredible. So well deserved. They've got 5, 6, 7 seasons worth of stuff that they could easily go to, and probably more. But if you haven't watched Fallout, and one of your biggest reservations has been, well, I never played the game, so I don't know if I'm going to understand it or if I'm going to be out of the loop. That's not the case at all. If you haven't watched it and you enjoy good television, I promise you, you will love Fallout.
One of my favorite tweets that I saw on it was somebody just saying they hated the character of Lucy because they're trying to watch the show and they keep getting lost in her eyes and they don't remember what's going on. And that
Shout
was
out
really
Ella
real
Purnell.
because Ella Purnell just not only an incredible actor, but beautiful big eyes that really are captivating. And I saw that tweet and I was like, yeah, no, I feel you. I get that. Last Fallout question I want to ask you before we'd switch over to X-Men because I'm interested and I think other people might be too. If you haven't played the game and you watch the show, and so you want to play a game, where's your best spot to dive in? Are there any that are made for a next gen console, or are they all kind of older style?
So there are no Fallout games that are like available or that are kind of optimized for next generation consoles yet. But Fallout 4, except for Fallout 76, if I'm not mistaken, but like I don't care if don't play Fallout 76. I am begging you if you're listening to this. I don't care if somebody pays you or if they give it to you for free, do not play Fallout 76 because then you'll be so thrown off and turned off by it, you won't want to go play anything else. But there is a next gen update, a huge next gen update coming for Fallout 4 at the end of this month. I believe it's April 25th. And there not only is it a next gen update, we're getting 60 FPS, all that stuff, but there's also new missions, new content. So I'm a little upset. I think they kind of missed their window on that. I wish they would have been a few weeks earlier. That would have been really cool because I know a lot of people that are interested, are, talking about the same thing that you just asked me, and they're interested in getting into the games. But New Vegas is great. I will say once you kind of get back before, like New Vegas and 4 are the ones that are more modern, a little more recent. You can kind of feel the outdatedness once you get back to 3. I mean, 3 is still, there's a lot to love with 3, but and even I've never played 1 and 2 because those were, I think I was like not even 5 to 10 years old when those came out. So admittedly, I haven't played those, but I've played 3, New Vegas, unfortunately, a little bit of 76, and then 4, I've probably sunk like 1,000 hours into 4. So I would say my advice is to, and I know it sounds counterintuitive, but to start with 4 because these games are also self-contained. They don't follow the same story. Like it doesn't pick up. Now I know the timeline kind of says otherwise because it's been moving forward, but they're all, like I said, excuse me, they're all self-contained. So somebody can play 4 and then 3 and then all right, 4 and then New Vegas and then 3 and they're not like, wait, what's going on? Because they're all their own story. So I would start with 4, but I would wait until the end of this month until I believe, like I said, April 25th, because that's when the next gen update drops.
From from Disney Plus to Prime, back to Disney Plus in a year that we thought that would be calm, chill, boring, not much to watch. It's actually been a fair amount of pretty interesting content. We're now switching over to X-Men 97, where we have a very special guest joining us, friend of the show, third time on the podcast. Whoa, I clicked the wrong button there. Author of MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios from TheRinger.com. Dave Gonzales, how you doing, Dave?
Hey, doing good. Excellent to be back. Congratulations on the expansion of your family.
Thank you.
I'm showing up with a little less of my colon that I had the last time, but healed up, ready to talk some X-Men 97.
Before we even dive into it, I know just from following you on your Twitter and on your journey of healing, the one thing you were most looking forward to was getting to the theater to see Godzilla versus Kong. What did you think of the movie?
It was fantastic. I'm so happy that I was able to go see it actually in theaters and was healed up by then. I brought my partner, significant other, Java, who usually doesn't go to theaters. We don't necessarily always like the same type of movies, and when we do, we like to be, somewhere we could pause and discuss them. But I was like, listen, this is gonna be dumb, but I think fun dumb if you'd like to come. And she's like, yes, absolutely. And we both just had a great time in the theater. What a time to see giant monsters punching each other.
Couldn't agree more. I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet because of the new baby, but I am looking forward to getting to see it as well. But we're here to talk about X-Men 97. The last 2 times we've talked, we have gushed together about 90s animated Marvel shows, and now we're getting one revived. X-Men is here. What have you thought of the new series so far?
I mean, I was into it even for the first 4 episodes, but like I love the how it still has the fidelity that you would want from the original series. Like, if anything, they've cleaned it up and got rid of some of the jump frames. But even like the mouth shapes that they're using for lip sync are like what I would call like mid 90s mouth shapes. Like we've gotten in 2D animation a little more smooth in between mouth transitions, but they're like, that would break what X-Men the animated series was, and they want X-Men the animated series or X-Men 97 to look as much like X-Men the animated series as possible. So everything they've tweaked, I think, is great. I was very thrilled to hear the new version of the theme still feels like the old version of the theme, just like very small tweaks that make a lot of sense. And that's sort of how I feel across the board. Like, if you have to change so little to update an animated series that I really loved, I would love for this to become a thing. Like, keep giving me late 80s, early 90s, updated animation. There was even a part of me that was like, would it be a fun project to like go back and reanimate like an episode of the real Ghostbusters just using like modern day techniques? Because I haven't seen it look this good, but also look like cell animation up until this point. And so it's been great. I thought I was a big fan of what they were doing with What If, is sort of like that 3D hybrid with 2D coloring. But now that I'm like, oh, you could just keep it flat and be this dynamic, like, absolutely. I think I'm very happy this type of animation's back on television, whatever we call that now.
Yeah, as streaming services are transitioning to be exactly like cable, it
Yes.
will kind of get more difficult to describe. Adam, what did you think about specifically episode 6? I want to get my one qualm out of the way instead of because everything else is positive for me, and then I'm going to throw it to you because it was like I said about the Bad Batch. I think those 2 weeks should have been one episode. I think this episode should have been 2. We get half focused on Professor X. We get half focused on Storm. I think they each should have had our own episodes, and it would have been even better. But that's it for qualms. It's going to be positive for me the rest of the way. What did you think about episode 6?
I don't disagree with that. Like, I don't disagree that it probably would have been better if we had split this up and maybe kind of went into both of those a little bit more. But for me personally, I really wouldn't call that a qualm, just because it didn't even bother me, and I hadn't even really considered that until you just mentioned it. That I was like, well, yeah, I guess that would have worked like that. So, but I love this episode. And we've been talking about this throughout covering the show, that having not seen any of the original series, it did feel a little weird to me, just with my only experience being live action X-Men, like Charles not being there. So then, because things don't really get all that crazy in the live action movies, and then Charles here is like on another planet about to marry an alien woman, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'm in. I'm all the way in on this because it's so weird and crazy, and that's the kind of stuff that we just don't get all that often. But it seems like that's the story of the X-Men, is weird, crazy shit for like people that are familiar with
crazy, horny.
Yeah,
exactly, horny too, with all of this crazy stuff. And I'm like watching the whole time, and I have no idea who anybody is. I know a little bit of Gladiator because I play Marvel Snap. I've seen Gladiator, so like that's pretty much the only character of all this that I was like, did the Leo pointing meme because I was like, oh, that's Gladiator. I know him. No idea anything else about him other than that he's in Marvel Snap. But it was just, to me, it was like exploring something new entirely new for the first time watching this episode. And I know that's we did that a little bit in, I think it was episode 4, the Mojo World episode. And that didn't resonate as much with me as this did. I know we talked about it at the time that it felt a little too meta for me, but this was just, whatever the hell this was that they were cooking when they made this, they knocked it out of the park, because this was all my shit right here. Just so wacky and weird.
Dave, what about you? What did you think about episode 6? We finally get Professor X back. Shout out our guy, Ross Marquand, friend of the show, did a great job of voicing Professor X. And then, of course, the rise of Storm as well.
Yeah. it was interesting. It's interesting hearing the perspective of someone who didn't watch the original series. Because once we cut to space, I'm like, that's Shi'ar ships. And like, I'm not as into the comics, the space stuff in the comics to necessarily know it from that. I know it from the Phoenix Saga and the Dark Phoenix Saga from X-Men the animated series. I'm like, yeah, the weird bird people aliens are back. And then having Ronan call what is it, Deathbird a pigeon, and just sort of like having that story whirlwind into it. I agree with your sort of overall criticism that this probably would have been good at 2 episodes. I think very specifically, the Storm story in both the previous part 1 and this one in part 2, if they just would have done Life Death as one episode, I think it would have probably made it a little bit clearer what was happening. It kind of took me like a second viewing of this episode to feel better about what happened, because the first time I'm just like, so this demon that apparently got caged by Forge comes back and unlocks her power and lets her grow her hair and manifest like a new, costume. And I had to come to terms with the fact that, Forge's machine back in part 4 probably worked, and it's probably like her internal block that she needs to face her claustrophobia. And doesn't matter if the demon's real the second time or if it's just a manifestation in her mind. Like, ultimately, no. Like, for me, it's the conclusion to the Storm stuff was good, but it felt slightly rushed. But then again, that's like a very small criticism, because also what I love about X-Men 97 is how much plots they're able to burn through and make it feel like everything still gets as much consideration. Or maybe if something goes by too fast, but then after the episode, you're like, that's kind of screwed up that Professor Xavier is like, trying to integrate into society. And finally he's like, okay, I'm just going to put everybody in astral plane timeout and tell them their society sucks. And I'm like, yeah, this is why the Shi'ar hate Terrans, man, is because that's your solution to everything. They ran across you and your X-Men. They didn't run across Peter Parker first. If they ran across Peter Parker, maybe they look like Terrans, like, slightly nicer than they would look at it. But Professor X has always, had something up his butt. And I'm glad that new Professor X still has that same thing up his butt, because we're going to need him back on Earth. With the developments that happened last episode, which was kind of amazing. But once again, this series is zigging when I think it's going to zag. So like when you guys were like, come on for this episode, I'm like, oh, good. I'll reread Life Death, because this is Life Death part 2. Surely that's all we're going to be talking about. And then it's like, we start and MCU Ronan, which is the version of Ronan that only shows up so somebody bigger can defeat him, is like right at the front. And I'm like, oh, right. We're doing more than I was expecting with this episode of television. So I'm very happy with all the ground that we covered. And I'm very happy that no matter what corner of the X-Men universe we're in right now, somebody's horny for somebody else. I just love that about this show.
It was the least horny of the episodes until Professor X just slips in that I don't even remember specifically what he said, but it was basically like a, don't mind if I do kind of thing there.
Well.
Slips in, and it's like, oh yeah, of course they had to have that in here as well. But it's like you said, I'm thinking this was going to be fully Storm focused. I did feel that was a bit rushed too. But having said that, it's like you said, they're packing in so much plot so fast. We went from this is Jean Grey and she's pregnant to just kidding, it's Madeline Pryor to and she's dead.
Yeah,
just like
one Goblin like, Queen episode. That's all you get.
Yeah, exactly. And so it definitely is moving at an incredibly swift pace. Before I throw it back to Adam, I actually want to know, Dave, what was your understanding of this? Because the animated series from the 90s ends with Professor X in space. Mm-hmm. He is not in Earth. He is with the Shi'ar. That's where it ends. He's with Lilandra. He's with the Shi'ar. He just stopped the Phoenix Saga and her crazy brother and getting the M'Kraan crystal and all of this crazy stuff. Then apparently there's a time jump. He's assassinated on Earth and now he's back in the Shi'ar. What was your... am I missing something? Was he there the whole time, or is it basically just he went back to Earth, almost died, and someone shipped him to space to maybe save him?
I think it was the ship to space, because my recollection was he like said goodbye to his X-Men and then looked like he was gonna die, and Lilandra showed up and was like, maybe we could do something, and that was how the series ended. So I was very surprised when we started X-Men 97. Everyone's just like, yeah, the professor's dead, and I'm like, That's not how I remember it. But I suppose that's easier than trying to explain to people that he's in space with the bird aliens. But that being said, they did just come back out and say that. They just waited 6 episodes to get into it, which I think was good. But I started realizing that it was happening not only because I knew that we had Marquand cast to do his version of the voice, but because we would get flashbacks of certain things, but never a Professor X flashback. And I was like, they're obviously hiding this for like some sort of reveal. And they do hold it for like 5 whole seconds in this episode because he comes out wearing his armor at first and he's walking. So you're like, oh, who knows who this is going to be. I already just got shown like 16 Royal Guard characters, which again, I only recognize like 2 of them. But I was like, cool. I think one of them is technically a Summers, I think, in terms of like comic canon, the one who does fire, but who knows how they're going to do that or if they need to deal with that. But yeah, sort of the reveal that he's here and he's back, and that they immediately pivot from answering any of the questions, just being like, but he feels guilty for abandoning the X-Men. It's like, don't worry about the back plot, which I think is a great thing that X-Men 97's been doing, where if you did watch the animated series or if you read especially the Chris Claremont and the beginning of new X-Men runs of comics, you'll be able to recognize things. But this series has its own internal logic where you kind of get it because it's moving through so much plot so fast. I don't think anybody's missing anything. There's just more on the sides should you want to go back and watch like the kind of dismal final 2 seasons of X-Men the animated series.
Adam, from what was your perspective of getting to meet all of these characters and getting shown where Professor X is getting thrown into here? Like Dave said, we get Ronan the Accuser, we get the Imperial Guard, who are not the most well-known group in Marvel Comics. Like, it's not like that was a super, oh wow, look, it's my favorite crew from space coming in here. It's not like we were getting Silver Surfer popping in or anything like that. Gladiator was really one of the few that I kind of knew who he was, and this is a team that's not necessarily good, necessarily bad. They're just they're the Shi'ar's guard, right? And the Shi'ar are an interesting lot because on the surface, you look at them and it's like they're very multicultural. They're very accepting. Look at all these other groups of people living together. But realistically, it's just your classic colonization story. And it's let's dominate the empire. And yeah, if you follow our rules, then you're welcome. And if you don't, see you later. It's wartime. Not so much. And we get our kind of classic between Lalandra and her sister. You're ruling the wrong way. I should be the proper ruler story. What was your take on the Professor X in space story?
Well, first off, all of these terms that you're describing and this information that you're giving me right now, I heard it for the first time in my life watching this episode yesterday, and I just heard it for the second time in my life as you just spit everything out to me.
The best definition I can give you is in terms of like Marvel Comics intergalactic hierarchy of how often we visit them. It's like Kree, Skrulls, Shi'ar.
Mm-hmm.
Kree, they're the number 3. They're the number 3 kind of intergalactic threat.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'd be upset to see more of the Shi'ar. I mean, so it seems like they got some pretty cool stuff going on, but I mean, it's like seeing Professor X in space was shocking to me, but as I said, having not seen the series, I will just go ahead and speak for everybody else that hasn't seen the series. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that, but it felt very accessible to me, and that the little explanation they give for him at the very beginning, like he was assassinated or whatever, I was like, okay, cool. Like as somebody that wasn't familiar, I bought into it, and I'm like, if he's back, he's back. I'm sure they'll explain it in some wacky way, but if not, and I prefer that they did it this way instead of like they were like showing him a little bit on and off all season and then kind of talking about him or like whatever, and like constantly trying to, because then it would have just confused me even more if I'm always wondering, having not seen it before, like, wait, why is he not here? And who's telling the truth about this? So then they just don't mention it for 3 or 4 episodes outside of like that first 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. And then they just throw us like head first into the deep end of the pool here. And they're just like, for those of you that aren't familiar, we're doing all of it right now. We're just giving you every single thing that you don't know, you don't understand. But that's like, I didn't know about half of this stuff or any of this stuff when I started watching it. That everybody has to have an entry point for all of this stuff. And for me, it was this episode for the Shi'ar and all these other crazy things. So, I mean, it worked for me. It's a lot of new stuff, but I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh, I missed what was going on. Like, I'm familiar and I understand what was going on Earth. So I don't know who I'm impersonating with that voice, but I wasn't looking to get back to Earth because I didn't understand what was going on. I was excited personally to learn more about what was going on here.
And Professor X's just existence there basically is threatening a Shi'ar civil war with the potential marriage there. And he decides reluctantly he's having an internal battle between his loyalty to Earth and the X-Men and his loyalty to Lilandra, who saved his life and he's in love with. And it, on the surface, it's like, bro, just go back to your X-Men. How dare you erase your memory? But like, hey, when you're in love, you're in love. You're doing what you got to do. I understand that he's got some certain feelings, especially when he still believes they're in good hands and they're going to be safe. And the X-Men are just chilling and good. Like he said, they were making love. They were drinking wine. They were dancing. But we do see kind of Professor X go classic Professor X mode, drops him in an astral plane classroom. Says class is in session. And I'm going to tell you exactly like Dave said, why your society sucks. It is funny how growing up, it's like, these are the good guys. I love all my good guy leaders. We got Professor X and Mr. Fantastic, Captain America, and Iron Man. And then you learn more about their characters, and everyone you're like, you did what? You said what? Especially, I think maybe more so with Captain America, less than the other three, but the other three and their variants have done some pretty crazy shit over the years. This is why Spider-Man's the best and purest heart of all of them. But we get a little bit of Charles's arrogance mixed in with some really good points. And one of my favorite parts of this series, Dave, is the bars. Like, there's just so many lines that are like, oh, and there's one every episode that really just kind of like sticks with you. And Magneto's had most of them, but for me with Charles, this one was, for me to be more, you must be less. And that's what he's trying to teach them, is like, you don't always have to put each other down to build yourself up. And that was kind of something that we, when we started Agents of Fandom, we're like, hey, we're going to do a podcast in a space where it's overcrowded for podcasts. And we're going to do a site talking about superhero stuff in a space heavily overcrowded with people talking about superhero stuff. But we're going to bring all these people into our shows too, because it's not competition. Trees don't compete for light. I learned about this in Ted Lasso. The sun, they can all grow together, and that's why they all grow straight up. And that's kind of what Charles is trying to teach them. And it was some interesting stuff mixed in with some crazy get out of my head moments. What did you think of it, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's really strong that he's also like, this is complicated. Like, the correct way is complicated. It's not something you could just apply in the, Shi'ar's case to world after world. Or I guess in the MCU case, in general, the Kree are sort of the people who are trying to apply that across the universe. So yeah, very interesting to see those two in conflict here. But I think Xavier's right on. Not completely right, because again, you're kind of like forcing the heads of this very successful empire into your second grade class with the blackboard in the front, which makes fun to us. It makes sense to us, the viewer. But if you just think about all the various cross cultures that's been happening, like they're of course scared that like a psychic's gonna like enter their brain and just start polluting it with ideas. That's what they're worried about in the first thing. I think Deathbird has some great bars in this one, calling the Earth the ghetto of the Milky Way.
Milky Way ghetto.
Just like it hits so hard. She last time we saw her, she was like making a deal with Apocalypse to like try to take over the Empire. So I was interested at the beginning to be like, oh, I guess she's just back part of the Royal Guard. She's fine. It's like, no, she's still trying to be like the pettiest person, but just try to get the the Shi'ar to overthrow her sister naturally so she could take her place. But yeah, I think her redesign and her sharper tongue really worked well here for me. And it was a great moment where we were learning about, sort of this colonial culture. But also, yeah, like I was saying, Professor X doesn't 100% treat it with the best thing either. He's talking to Gladiator. He's like, how Kipling of you. And I'm like, my man, they don't know what that means. I barely know what that means. But it's like, yeah, they don't realize the colony aspects. So then he hits them with the very illustrated blackboard thing, where he's like, you're basically cutting the legs off of civilization. And I'm like, very strong point from somebody who can't use his legs. Now you're doing it, Charles. But I love the whole complexity of it, and I do think a lot of it is forgiven. Yeah, in the same way that I think a lot of plot lines are able to move as fast and able to go from highs to lows in X-Men 97 like they are, because love is sort of a catch-all for like sort of what otherwise would be plot whiplash. Like, I've seen both in real life and in fiction people do like really illogical things for love. So if you're going to have a situation where you don't have that much time, just be like, yeah, Forge, Storm, soulmates. I'm like, okay, cool. Then they have a deeper, sort of connection. Or like, why would Professor Xavier ever abandon his X-Men? His entire existence seems to have been creating the X-Men. He's Professor X. What does the X and X-Men stand for? But yeah, he's in love, and so he's tempted by that, even if he isn't ultimately going to give himself over to it. So props again to X-Men 97 for not being afraid to be horny and use it in like almost a soap opera like fashion, where it allows us to believe some of the leaps that happen as we're moving through these plots fairly quickly.
The X-Men always have been Marvel's soap opera, and they will continue to be going forward, I think. But one of the most parts I found interesting about this, Adam, when they're kind of arguing with the Shi'ar Empire, and it reminded me a lot of just bigots in general, where, anything they don't like, they'll call woke, right? And the definition changes every week. The goalposts are always moving, and they'll just use a term to support what their current agenda of the day is. And that reminded me a lot of it when they're saying, like, not only is he Terran, he's a lower caste of Terran. He's a mutant. He's not the same. It's like, wait, you think they're very clearly not the lower evolutionary, like they're very clearly the next step, right? That's one of the whole points. But to fit that agenda of the day, you'd think this group that's conquering places left, right, and center, they like assembling a royal imperial guard of superpowered people. You'd think they'd be like mutants up here, regular humans down here. But to fit the agenda of the day, it kind of got swapped. I found that aspect of it really interesting. How did you take the Professor X torn between two worlds, what do I do thing before he's ultimately feels Gambit's death, feels what happens at Genosha, and decides I got to go back to Earth right now?
Yeah, well, first I have to say, I mean, there's some pretty interesting parallels here, because it's amazing that no matter how many resources or how big of a platform you have, that doesn't mean that you're saying anything intelligent. There's a lot of that at play here too. That's also going on in the real world. But I mean, as for that, it did make sense. I mean, you guys both said it perfectly. We've all done and have seen people do crazy stuff for love. That's like the one thing that will always drive people pretty much over anything else. Like love and survival are like the two things that will drive humans more than anything else. What we will do in terms of like the crazy things we'll do for it. So it's like, and he does love, excuse me, what's her name? Empress. I'm blanking on her name. Right. Okay. Yes. He does love her, but it's also like he's dedicated his life to the X-Men. Like he loves them. I mean, obviously not romantically, but it's, so when he learns about something like that, there's pretty much no other option for him. It kind of took me when he said, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he was like, if me going back to Earth is the end of our relationship, then then it ends here. Because like, this is the only choice for me. This is my only path ahead, which that like tells you how much he cares about the X-Men, because we know he really loves her and he wants to be with her and he wants to be here. So it's like all that stuff. I mean, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. This was all new to me because I had no idea he was even going to be in like, I didn't know when we saw him again if he was just going to be up on the moon with Captain America, or if he was just going to be hanging out in some bar with a beard. Like, if you had given me a list, like, to write down where I think we would see Xavier again, like up in space, married to an alien empress, would have been probably not as far down on the list as I think it would have been, but it would have been it definitely wouldn't have been in my top 3, 4, or 5 or anything like that. So this was all wacky to me, but it all really worked. It made perfect sense that he was having to grapple with it. That's something we've seen, in a whole lot of TV shows and movies, that my duty or my love, like grappling with all that kind of stuff. But we see it all the time because it always works, and like generally, and it works really well here too.
Dave, what was your take on Gambit being the one he saw? Because Magneto was heavily mentioned throughout this episode. He seemingly gets vaporized in episode 5, but it's Gambit's death that Professor X feels. Obviously, with all the other skulls, you could tell it was like a feeling what happened in Genosha. But was that to you a little bit of a sign that Magneto's still hanging around there somewhere?
Oh yeah, I mean, I live by the television rule, which is you don't see a body, then everything's on the table. So I think they've been trying to telegraph to us very specifically that Gambit's dead. Are any X-Men ever dead? No, but at least I hope for this season, just because that's how momentous it felt. That Gambit's dead. He's out of the opening credits. We got Nightcrawler in there with his 80s comic book logo. Absolutely love that. But the idea that Gambit's dead makes a lot more sense to me than Magneto being dead. Both I had after episode 5 had the same sort of thing where it's like everybody's dead. Like I like trying to go back through and look at all those bodies that they were like piling on the rooftop, being like, oh, do they move, or like is the whole council dead? But
especially because Bo DeMaio on Twitter seemingly confirmed that the whole council is dead.
That's what it seems
except
like.
For somebody asked about Emma Frost and he dropped a little devil smiley face, and so that one still may be unconfirmed, but he confirmed that Madeline Pryor was dead. Like, we're still getting those repercussions of like Cyclops is gonna find out his baby mama's gone.
Yeah, that's gonna be huge. I mean, I would be knowing like some of the comic book storylines the X-Men have gone on. It would be interesting if Magneto's out of the picture long enough for Scott to step up and sort of challenge Sinister as trying to take control of the mutant population, but also he would probably be much more Magneto, or at least that's what he was sort of slipping into with his interview in episode 5. And there are lots of comic book versions of Scott Summers that is essentially a villain. So I think that would be something interesting to probe. But I do think we'll have Magneto be back, mostly because I feel like this version, they still call him Magnus, right? They don't know he's Eric or anything like that. So we've got more Magneto that we could deal with, even though I did really appreciate his arc during the first half of the season. I do think if Professor X is coming back, I think it would be very odd to have an X-Men animated show where only one of them is around at the same time. You kind of have to live up to the promise of the opening credits and have them both with their team of X-Men, even if the lineup's different. Eventually, sort of clash. So I would look for Magneto to come back either right at the very end, or maybe this season is just dealing with Sinister and what happened in Genosha, and we sort of jump into next season, because we know the second season is in production, and the way that this has been received so far, I think it's definitely something that we could look forward to as being of the same creative team. Bo DeMaio wasn't let go until after his work was done on season 2. So whatever X-Men 97 season 2 ends up being, I hope it's one long arc, because every episode that's being added on here, I'm trusting them more and more with long arcs. Whereas I think before I was like, oh, isn't it cute? All my favorites are back. Oh, hey, Cyclops is cool again. And then episode 5 hit and I'm like, oh, they're playing a long game here in terms of evolving what the X-Men property can be these days. And so, yeah, I hope Magneto's a part of that. I do think if we do edge towards the Krakoa era or some of the Krakoa technology that has existed in the comics, Gambit could come back. But as like any good character, come back different. Because what's the point of coming back and having all your problems solved? So we're gonna have to see what that looks like when it happens.
I very much could see this end up finishing with some kind of let's rebuild Genosha. What's it going to be called? It's going to be called Krakoa. And it's coming with our own Lazarus Pit. And that's just kind of how it ends going forward to season 2. But funny enough, this is why, as I'm showing visuals, this is why you need to be watching us and on YouTube and hitting that like button. I kind of forgot that the book wouldn't like automatically provide software updates and just like stay up to date as things were happening. Like it's finite and it ends, because after all this Bodemayo stuff is going down, I legitimately have the thought I should look in my book and wonder if there's anything going on that, if they have any information on that situation. And I was like, no, that actually is impossible because this book is paper and it's in my hands. Adam, I enjoyed the Professor X stuff, but the Storm stuff really was the bee's knees for me this episode. I just one of my favorite X-Men, and what I ended up loving that they did here is it was a very psychological arc. It was not, I got to find this cure, I got to find this technology. It was, I need to sort through my own trauma. What did you think of the life death aspect of this episode?
Oh, I mean, Storm has been like one of my favorite parts. Like not having that knowledge, getting to watch her. I think she's pretty much had like the 2 best moments of the series so far. I think it was either episode 1 or 2 with the whole like Omega level mutant incoming, and then she just decimates that was top tier stuff. And then we get it again today or yesterday. The episode is like, "You are the thunder, and I am the lightning." Whatever it is that she says, I was a little. As you were talking about it earlier, it did make me kind of long for a little bit more before we got back to this, because it really doesn't seem like it was all that long ago that she did lose her powers and she was going to go on this journey. Now I get we've still seen her 2 or 3 times over several different weeks, and she's been going through all this stuff. I get it. It does work. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I do feel like it would have been a little better, because it does seem like she was pretty much having to figure out everything that was going on. And then it's like this episode, she figures it out. And there's only like 12, 13 minutes with them. Probably, I think the majority of the episode focuses on everything that's going on with Professor X and Shi'ar. So it's like she figures it. Now, I love the whole physical, like that the adversary was a physical manifestation of like her own fears. That's my shit right there. I absolutely love that. And I love seeing people have to overcome, like any characters in general, overcome these things like that, especially when they lose their powers. It reminded me a lot, now obviously for different reasons, but in season 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Zuko just loses his firebending after he leaves the Fire Nation, and it's like that ability is still inside of him. It's not like something happened to him. And it's a little bit similar like with Aang. I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent to talk about Avatar, but it's like similar with Aang too, in terms of like he got his chakra blocked and all that kind of stuff. But then when he finally reconnects with his past lives, and we get that same stuff here when she finally accepts who she is and like is not going to let these things that have happened to her and that trauma define her, and she reconnects with herself and her powers. It's just like, even it made me feel good. It made me like feel empowered. Like, oh, I should go do something good. I feel like I can go do something good. Like I can go kick some ass today, because that's just what like the great television, great stories will make you want to do. And while I would, like I said, it would have been nice to get a little bit more of it. I feel almost a little icky saying that I wanted to see her struggle for longer. It's not that I wanted Storm to put Storm through the ringer for even longer, but it does seem like we kind of got there a little quick, because they're balancing a lot of things right now. And I still think they're doing a great job with like kind of navigating all these different storylines, but it would have been nice to get a little bit more of it. But that doesn't mean for me that it didn't work at all, because it was still awesome.
Agreed. I think if there was more build up, it would have hit even harder. But I'm with you. This was one of my favorite moments of the series when she finally gets her power up. I think I'm just cluing in right now as you were giving all those different descriptions that the reason why, and I've talked about this lots, but the reason why my least favorite superhero trope is, oh no, they lost their powers. They don't have them anymore. Now they're just regular person. And my favorite one is, it's Super Saiyan power up time. It was inside them all along. Here they go. Now they're going to win the battle. The very first movie I ever saw in theaters, and I have a active like memory of going to see was Hercules, Disney's Hercules. And that's kind of the main thing that happens towards the end. The big sad part, he loses his powers. And I think at 3 years old, when I went to see that movie, that really affected me. And then he gets them back, and it's like, oh my God, yes, Herc, you did it. You're a true hero. And that was kind of what was happening with Storm here, because my understanding of the adversary was very much that the adversary was like a depression allegory, if not for Forge, but for Storm. You wanted to lose your powers. You wanted to be comfortable. I know when I've been in depressive states, how often I've gotten myself stuck in like a thought process where I just wish I was like, if I was sick right now, then that would be better, because I would have an excuse to be doing nothing and to be feeling sorry for myself, and other people would feel bad for me too. And it's like, I want this bad stuff to happen to me so that I don't have to do anything and I can just kind of sit here. And that very much felt like that's kind of what was hampering Storm. Dave, I'm interested in your take on that, and also how it seems like a lot of Storm's toughest foes are psychological as opposed to physical, whether it be the Shadow King from the original series or the adversary here. Do you think that's kind of just because it's tough to have a character who can stack up to Storm on a physical level?
I mean, that's the problem with an Omega level mutant, man, is their powers theoretically are without limit. The only thing that limits them is how much they're able to, harness that internal power. So, yeah, I'm perfectly fine with Storm's, things being psychological. I do think it's really smart, especially with this animation style, to do things like the adversary and the Shadow King. I was very thrilled to see them sort of adapt what magic looks like. It seems like from the MCU when Forge was using his book. It definitely has some Doctor Strange-ish sort of like circles and spirals and runes.
I saw some tweets online of like, is Kahori related to Forge? Is that why the Watcher was there? And I was like, I thought I was usually had the far-fetched theories, but like even that one's a little bit too out there for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that they're moving it, that they're owning it all, sort of being even in the multiverse saga of a piece, so that Doctor Strange's power we know is pulling from other dimensions. So why would the magic look different here if it's pulling from another dimensional power? Was really into that. I definitely think, even though I was like, I would like this to be a full episode, I don't think we need to go into the original. I think it's Forge accidentally released the adversary during Vietnam because he had like a tough time. Like, I don't think we need to go that deep into it. And then the more I think about it, even though it did feel kind of fast, the more they were really smart with all of their choices. Very specifically, knowing that Storms is claustrophobic and bringing her into a cabin, bringing her from a cabin to inside a cave. Inside of that cave is a smaller cave. And then finally the adversary starts pushing in the rock walls against her. And that's what makes her manifest. But yeah, if you're an Omega level mutant, the only thing holding you back is you. And if I could have added one more beat to the Storm storyline, I think in the original her losing her power arc that happened under Claremont, there's a period of time where she goes back to the X-Men. She's like, "How I don't have powers, but how could I still be an X-Man?" And I think that is a good illustration of the reason why Storm is a bit more complex than other Omega level mutants, is because she has this responsibility. She has the responsibility of being an X-Man. In some iterations, she has the responsibility over, entire countries. She is, very protective of Wakanda in certain areas. In the Ultimate Black Panther line that is running right now in Marvel Comics, it looks like her and Killmonger are like the, trying to free as much of Africa as possible. So she has this responsibility with her great power. She is the with great power comes great responsibility character of X-Men 97 at this point, because everybody else who's as powerful as her really tries to impose things on other people. Storm just kind of shows up to be the balance, to be the nature, and I'm very glad that she's able to, embrace that in this episode. Even if it was sort of abridged, I think all the beats are there if you're willing to consider each one and what it's doing. Right down to, I think Bo DeMeo pointed out, that even though she's claustrophobic, you do have a Black woman being like, I can't breathe in a moment of crisis, to sort of connect that more to our current worlds and all the fucked up stuff that happens there. But she's able to embrace her own power by overcoming her fear. And wouldn't it be great if it was that simple for the rest of us? We're just not Omega level mutants.
Exactly. And it like you said, with great power comes great responsibility. It was such a Peter Parker, Kamala Khan-esque moment of and Storm kind of is their OG as much older to them of being the kind of, I think Spider-Man was probably created before Storm, but you know what I mean in terms of their age within universe. And it very much was reminiscent of, even though Peter Parker didn't say with great power comes great responsibility in Civil War, when he drops that, if I have the power to do something and I don't do it, and then something bad happens, that's my fault.
Yeah.
That very much felt like what Storm was trying to work her way through in that. And kind of like when we were talking about the Bad Batch, this episode feels like a lot where it's setting up as opposed to, and they revealed a lot of new details, but it's setting up a big epic conclusion. It's bringing Professor X back to Earth. It's bringing Storm her powers back with a badass new outfit, badass new haircut, and she's ready to fuck some shit up. And it's revealed to close out this episode that Bolivar Trask is not the one fully behind the new set of Sentinels. It is Mr. Sinister, a mutant himself. Before we go into some of the details of him, Adam, I want to know for you, how do you feel that the setup as Mr. Sinister as the big bad is going? Without knowing much of his backstory and with them just teasing him throughout so far, are you worried? Are you fearful of this upcoming villain?
So I am. That's a good question. I am afraid of him, but I'll be honest. Like when he keeps popping up, particularly at the end of this episode, I was like, "Oh, that's right, he's in this show." I completely forgot about that. So, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I wish we, and this might, I don't know, this might be completely off base, but I feel like it would have been better to get, like, I know, I understand the concept of like a villain behind the scenes, pulling the strings, doing all this kind of stuff. And maybe it's just because I have no history with Dr. Sinister or Mr. Sinister, excuse me. I don't know his power base or like what he's capable of, or anything. Like I know he's involved with cloning and stuff like that, but that's pretty much all I know about him. So this very well may be textbook Mr. Sinister, all this kind of stuff that's going on. And it's just because I don't know about him, but it would be nice if we maybe got a little bit more of him, because I admittedly at the end of this episode, I was like, wait, what's going on here with Trask? Like, I remember this was Trask. I was like, wait, what all is going on here? And I was like, oh, that's right. Like he's in this show. And that to me it almost kind of threw me as like a little bit of a red flag, because I don't like forgetting about characters in a show, like when they're there, especially somebody that's super important. Now I know I'm imagining myself saying this about something like Thanos, like building up through the Infinity Saga, whatever. Like, oh, he's the ultimate big bad. Like, we should be wanting to see him more. So it's not even like feel like could possibly refute my own criticism. But and again, it may be goofy and I may be off. But I would like to, like personally, I would like to see a little bit more of him. Maybe that for me, that's kind of one of those accessibility points where, for those of us, again, I'm just going to speak for everybody else that hasn't seen the original series. For those of us that aren't familiar with him, maybe it would be a little like easier to connect with him if we were getting a little more, but then maybe he wouldn't be as intimidating. I don't know. I am far worse of a writer than Bo DeMeo is, and would not have done a great job writing the show. So I'm not going to say that I could have done a better job at all, because I most definitely could not have. But maybe that's what it would. Maybe that's because that's like the one thing that struck me in this episode. Because even like you said at the beginning, that being your one qualm, that we might could have split this into 2 episodes. And while I do agree that I think it would have been better, like I said, I still am happy with what we got, to the point where I wouldn't consider it a qualm. But if I did have to put my finger on a qualm, it probably would be this, because I'm not connecting with him in the way that I am so many of the other characters. And maybe that's just because he's probably been on screen or really been like a factor for 2, 3, 4 minutes max. Maybe we got him a little bit with the Nathan Summers stuff, and then we haven't really seen him again since that I remember until now. And then it's like, it was me all along. So I don't know. Maybe if we got a little more, maybe saw some of the planning, and maybe we'll get that stuff in the next few episodes. I don't know. These are all, I'm throwing out a lot of crazy hypotheticals and what ifs, but You know, who knows? Maybe I hope by the end of the series that I am more connected with him and I enjoy him more as a character than I do now. I'll say that.
It does seem to date that they're relying a little bit on this is the X-Men most people know about, not named Magneto, Apocalypse, or the Phoenix. Haha, here he is. Especially just because they introduced him fairly early and then just kind of omitted him for a couple episodes, then to show, of course, he's been behind it all. I admittedly don't know all that much about Mr. Sinister, aside from he's basically the dude that is obsessed with Jean and Scott and their DNA and wants to clone them as many times as possible to create the ultimate mutant. What did you think of the Sinister reveal at the end? Why would he be behind all of this, Dave?
I think he's trying. I mean, he's definitely into cloning. He's trying to create a perfect line of mutants, and the ugliest part of eugenics is culling the people that you don't think should breed. And I think that's what he's doing with Genosha, and it's gross. But the fun thing about Mr. Sinister, the way they're sort of rolling him out, is of the characters you named who are like traditional. If you named a bunch of like X-Men villains that people are familiar with, most of them are fighters. Mr. Sinister is a schemer. Mr. Sinister is a planner. And so it kind of works that's how they're rolling him out. I would definitely think that he's got to, step out and do some stuff for himself in whatever the conclusion to this season is going to be. But in terms of like a season-long villain, he's been there in the background. If he's been pulling Trask's strings this entire season, sort of building to this assault of Genosha, then he's been the shadow villain since the first episode of this season. And we took a little detour to deal with little Nathan Summers, aka Cable. And Cable, tried to jump back in time, but wasn't able to stop it this time. So I think that the fact that even his perfect genetic child Step is rebelling against him from the future means that we have a huge fight coming up because he's sort of kicking everything into place. I think it's also really smart to use Mr. Sinister, who was around for the animated series, instead of Cassandra Nova, who was the character in the comics that was doing this plot, the one who used Bolivar Trask's, I think it was like brother or cousin's DNA to get the master mold. Here it's just Mr. Sinister just like, give me your DNA, Trask, which makes sense because Sinister loves DNA. But I thought that maybe they were going to take a step of introducing Cassandra Nova, which is just like such a huge amount of explaining to people about who that character is. So I do think it's actually smart, if you're going to have a schemer, let it be Mr. Sinister, who we're at least you can be familiar with. If you want to go back and stream more X-Men on Disney Plus, you could learn more about Mr. Sinister. But I think it's good to have a schemer as your big bad if you're going to have very little time with them, because then you could always be like, aha, he was behind it all along, and it feels like a twist. Whereas it's like, if Juggernaut was the big bad, then he has to be breaking through a wall every episode, or what the hell is he doing? So I like the switch to Sinister. I think he's got, a very creepy voice and a very 90s look of costume that physics-wise makes no sense to me. So it'll be fun to see him in this medium. And also a character that hasn't been tarnished by an attempted live-action adaptation yet. So he is just the animated Sinister, and I hope he comes out of this season A, defeated, but B, looking like a badass. Like, I hope he is a Thanos level threat by the time we're at the end of this.
I want to love the Phoenix Saga. I would love to love the Phoenix Saga, and just because they remade First X-Men Last Stand again in Dark Phoenix, but worse, and the first one already wasn't very good, it's just forever tarnished for me. And you're right, that hasn't happened with Sinister. I do wonder if the villain choice was like planned to coincide with the MCU for what's at all. Like you brought up Cassandra Nova, maybe they didn't want to utilize her so close with Deadpool and Wolverine, as she is rumored to be the villain in Deadpool and Wolverine, as kind of like a Professor X, maybe instead of as a Professor X variant as opposed to sibling kind of thing. But the other thing I could potentially wonder, it's like you said, like we've gotten Phoenix Saga twice in live action. We've already seen Apocalypse. It didn't go very well. They're probably immediately in the MCU not going to do the Professor X versus Magneto, bang, 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 one against the other right off the bat. They'll probably be more nuanced. So when the X-Men inevitably appear in the MCU, maybe this is kind of like a test run for Sinister and to introduce fans to Sinister a little bit for that MCU run. And it's fun to speculate about the future because we really know very, very little about the future of the MCU right now. So it makes it fun to theorize, it makes it fun to guess. But if you want to know more about the past of the MCU, there is no better guy to let you know than Dave Gonzales alongside his co-authors, Gavin Edwards and the incredible Joanna Robinson. MCU Reign of Marvel Studios. Check it out wherever you get books. Dave, where can the people find you on socials? What's going on with Trial by Content right now? Give us a few plugs before we get out of here.
Yeah, you could follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd as DA7E, and on Trial by Content. We just came out of trying to figure out the best Steven Spielberg movie. Democracy says it's Jurassic Park, and I'm fine with that. So we're going into a 3-week series of trying to determine the best baseball movie, and currently, as we're recording this,
surprising results on the Twitter polls.
Yes, my boy the Natural is getting crushed, and I thought at least it would be like over 10%, but apparently I'm wrong. So by all means, listen to Trial by Content. We at least talk about some of, I think, the best baseball movies ever made. Whether or not those things win, you get to decide.
Field of Dreams coming in well behind Moneyball on the Twitter poll was something that threw me off because Moneyball, as much as I love that movie, I think Moneyball is a great, great movie. It's a horrible baseball movie. About the baseball specifically, it does a terrible job breaking down the baseball. But I adore the movie. I think it's great. So that one doing so well, I find kind of funny. Make sure you check out Dave as well as Trial by Content on Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever you get your socials. Check out the Agents Fandom as well, at Agents Fandom on TikTok and Twitter, Agents of Fandom everywhere else. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, as well as subscribe to the Agents of Fandom wherever you get your podcasts. We got some really, really great and new exciting articles up on the website right now. I got to do an interview with Zui Nguyen as well as Frank Nguyen Khan for The Sympathizer on HBO's brand new show in the Game of Thrones Succession slot every Sunday night. We talked a little bit about the show, their history, as well as what it was like working with Robert Downey Jr. and who they would want to play in the MCU. So make sure you check that one out. And like Adam always says, check the website out every single day because there's lots of great content always coming. We're hopefully going to have some exciting things coming for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So stay tuned for that. On behalf of myself, Adam, our wonderful guest, Dave, all the Agents of Fandom behind the scenes, thank you so much to everyone for tuning in today. And we will see you back next week covering more Bad Batch and more X-Men 97. Peace.
Peace.